It's way easier being an employee. You get a regular paycheck with little risk. So why do people want to be self-employed or start their own business when the failure rate for a new business is very high? And if you're self-employed, how can you finance your business if you have no credit? Answers to those questions and more starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
It's been 9 weeks since Ted Michalos has been a guest here on the podcast. Ted, where you been?
Well, we've been very busy. I mean, this isn't going to make anybody feel better, but May was the busiest month we've ever had. June was the busiest June we've ever had. The world's going crazy. I believe I predicted this back in January.
I believe you did. Everyone will want to go to our year-end, well, it was in December, yes, our year-end podcast, predictions podcast, where Ted predicted that the insolvency rate would go up, I think, 10% this year.
Apparently I was wrong.
Well, it will probably go up by higher than that, although
Right.
As we record this, that's essentially where it's tracking. So, okay, well, welcome back. Good to have
you.
you back. Today, I want to pick your brain on being self-employed or running your own business and how you can stay out of financial trouble.
Okay.
We know from our internal stats, because it's right on my card here,
Right.
that every year around 5% of our clients tell us that one of the causes of their financial difficulties was business failure, and about a quarter of our clients get into trouble due to job loss or a reduction in their income. Now, there's no guarantee that your business will survive, so first question for you, why would someone choose to become self-employed?
Well, the question's a little biased. I mean, the fact of the matter is most people don't choose to be self-employed. It's foisted on them. Perhaps their employer says, you know, I'm not going to hire as an employee. I'm going to take you on as a contract position or as a subcontractor. There's some industries where that's very common. Most of the trades, constructions, even software design, right? Aren't all those people contract workers as well?
Well, we certainly see that here. And
Yeah.
I mean, we're recording this at our studio in Kitchener. And so here in Waterloo, I mean, you see it in Guelph a lot. I see it
Right.
a lot in Toronto that you're a web developer. So we're going to hire you to redevelop our website. It's a limited term project. So you come in as a contract. Database developer.
Yeah, what
same
they call
thing.
it, the gig economy? Is that
The
what
gig
that is?
economy, yes, where you're doing a limited project. And construction, of course, is exactly the same. You build
Right.
the house once.
Yep.
You do the renovation and then you're not needed. So it's very common in the construction industry, as you
Right.
said, that the employer, it's not really an employer though,
Yeah.
they will say, okay, you want to come and be the framer on this, set of 5 houses I'm building.
Right.
I'm going to pay you as a self-employed person. So why? Why would an employer do that?
Well, so the biggest single reason is that it provides them with the maximum flexibility. So once you take somebody on as a full-time employee, you've got obligations for, well, not only source deductions and government programs, but there's probably benefits and it's a different mindset when you have employees. You've got some responsibilities. So if you have people as subcontractors or contract employees, the relationship is distinctly different. You don't have the need anymore. Well, who are the first people that are going to leave?
Yes, the word responsibility is a key one, and I think you're exactly right. And if you are an employer in Ontario, I actually went and looked it up.
Yep.
You are required to pay towards CPP, for example, Canada Pension Plan. So in 2019 in Ontario, both the employer and the employee pay 5.1% of their pay. So 10.2% in total.
Right.
The maximum employer contribution is about $27.50 a year. EI, the employer pays 1.4 times what the employee pays.
Right.
So the maximum an employer would pay is around $1,200 a year. And then there's something called employer's health tax, which is anywhere from just under 1% to just under 2% based on the size of your payroll that an employer has to pay. So between CPP, EI, EHT, in Ontario, an employer is paying over 9.3% to the government in addition to basic wages. And you already hit on things like benefits. If you're
Right.
paying that, then it becomes an even higher number than that. So it's pretty easy to see why an employer would say, hey, dude, you're going to be self-employed. I just saved myself 9%.
Yep.
And I think that's probably the main reason that there is pressure on employers and employees.
It's the extension of the whole laissez-faire capital model, right? You push as much off on somebody else.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, it's downloading. The federal government downloads it to the provincial downloads it to the municipal.
So I download it to the guy who can't deal with it.
Yeah, and that's and we end up seeing the results of that. So why then don't all employers just say everybody has to be their own company? Everyone's self-employed. We're no longer going to be doing any CPP, EI, anything.
Well, there's some issues with that. And the most important being is that you lose a certain element of control if these people aren't your employees. And so if you don't have control, there's an element of risk. When someone is an employee, I can tell them what to do, how to do it. I control the tools and the means that they're going to do it for how the work is. I set their hours, all these sorts of things. So, and more importantly, there's a relationship. So there's a dependency. If someone's taken on as an employee, I'm making a long-term commitment to you. You're making a long-term commitment to me. People are the most important resource in a business. You want to make sure you take care of the people that are critical to your future business.
Yeah, and you're right. So I think some employers are a bit short-sighted on that, and
many of them.
I can save a percent or two here or there. So
right.
it is not as simple as just saying you're self-employed, because Revenue Canada will come back and say no.
Right, they've got the test.
They got the test. Did you what did you do? You already listed them out.
Risks and rewards, control your hours, who owns the tools, the means of production.
Exactly.
Those are the big ones.
So if I show up at my employer's office, I use their computer, I work 9 to 5, I don't have to collect any money from customers, there's no risk, then you're an employee, whether or not you've set it up as a self-employed person.
Right.
So, okay, so I think we can conclude that in a lot of cases, employees don't really have any choice.
Right.
The boss says, hey, you want to work on this project? Then you're going to have to be you're going to have to be self-employed. You're going to have to either set up your own corporation or just, be self-employed.
Right.
Okay. You're your own little business. Now, back on podcast number 242, I gave some pointers on, what's necessary to be successful in business. And one of them I hit on was money.
Right.
Capital. So you need to have capital to operate a business. Now, obviously, some businesses you need more than others. Can you think of an example from and all these clients you've been meeting with over the last few months of someone who got into trouble as a self-employed person because they did not have enough capital?
Well, and so I'll call them Jane and Bob.
These are made-up names.
And for whatever reason, they were forced into self-employment, and they thought they would buy a sign-making franchise. So they got the $30,000 for the equipment, and they signed the lease on the space, and they were ready to go. What they forgot was that they didn't have enough money, capital, background to support them while they were building the business. So they were able to cover most of their operating costs, but they couldn't pay themselves anything. And that's pretty typical in a small business. It might take you 18, 24, 36 months before you can pay yourself. Well, if you can't pay yourself, you can't pay your rent, you can't pay your mortgage, you can't do all the things you're supposed to do. And so you run into trouble very quickly. So it's not that they couldn't run a successful business. They simply didn't plan for the ramp-up period, and they were undercapitalized. They didn't have enough savings to pay for the business to develop.
And let's talk about that time lag then.
Yep.
So they bought the business on day one. Why is there a time lag?
Well, so when you buy the business on day one, that's when you lay out all of the initial purchases. Even if you're leasing equipment, there's down payments and that sort of stuff. And then you've got to wait for customers to start paying you. Well, first you got to find the customers, you got to provide the service, and then lots of customers will take advantage of the fact that you're a small business, and your terms are pay on pickup, but they may stretch that to 30, 60, 90 days. And you're building a business, so you don't want to call them and say, well, I won't do any more work for you unless you pay me, because they'll just go find somebody else to do the business.
And that's why there is this, 6-month, 1 year, 2 year ramp-up period. I start the business on day one. Maybe it takes me 2 or 3 months to find my first customer. It takes 2 or 3 months to actually do the job, make the sign in this particular case.
And then
another
get paid.
2 or 3 months to get paid. Well, so there was 6 months to a year where you're paying rent every month.
Right.
You're paying your employees if you have any. You're paying all your other costs, but there's no money coming in.
That's
so
right.
It's not just the money you need to buy the initial machinery, but it's actually to finance it for that period of time.
You have to assume that for the first couple of years, you're not going to be able to pay yourself. That's the biggest mistake small business people make, is they just figure, oh, the money's going to roll in, I'm going to be great. And when you're talking to your friends, I'm a business person. Oh, I must make lots of money. Most business people don't make any money at all.
Well, and someday we'll do a podcast of when you and I started Ted Michalos back 20-some years ago, and how much money we actually made the first well, year or 2 or 10, it was.
I remember the first two. It's
Yes,
another show.
it was, yeah, and essentially it was zero.
Well, my T4 was $6,000 the first year we were operating.
So we were able to pay ourselves $6,000, and we had come from accounting firms where we were making more than $6,000. So it was a bit of a hit, but we knew that going in.
It was part of the plan.
It was part of the plan, and we had financing arranged and all that sort of stuff so that we could do it. So let's talk financing then.
Right. Well, and when you get to the point where you're not paying somebody, the first person you stop paying is yourself, but you got to take out enough to survive. Then the second person you stop paying is the government. CRA likes to call themselves an involuntary creditor. They don't approve credit with you. You just stop paying them, or you never start paying them. That's even more common.
And that's the most common thing you see.
Right. And it's the thing that gets you in the most trouble. Because CRA, for all the reasons that we all love to hate them, if we don't pay our taxes, we don't have any services anywhere. But they aren't there every month saying, pay us. So you miss a Rogers bill, and they're pretty quick on the phone. The government isn't like that. In fact, I think it takes them up to 3 years to catch up with you.
Yep.
Well, and by then, the problem is so big. The hole is so deep.
Well, and I'm sure you've seen this 1,000 times because I saw it probably 6 times last week.
Yep.
I became self-employed, and so the first year it was great because now there's nothing coming off my paycheck.
Right.
I get paid directly. It's great. I'm even billing for HST, so my check is even larger than it used to be. And then at the end of the first year, okay, things are going good. So April rolls around, and I have to file my taxes, and oh my goodness.
Right.
Not only did I not pay any taxes all year, but now I've got all this HST money as well, but I've already spent it.
Well, and depending on the type of work you do, you may not have deductions to offset the HST. So if you're someone that's some sort of intellectual service, I don't know, online English teacher, a software developer, you don't have a lot of deductions.
Well, even if you work in construction, if I go to the job site and they provide everything.
You're right off your boots.
Yeah, that's it. You're right off your boots, and maybe you've got some transportation expenses, but they're supplying the drywall, the tape, the mud, the whatever.
Yep.
So there's nothing. So now I get my accounting guy to do up my taxes, and he says, well, guess what? You owe $10,000.
Right. That you don't have.
I don't have $10,000. So you know what? Let's not even bother filing them.
Right.
So then a year or 2 or 3 goes by, and eventually CRA catches up to you and says, hey, you haven't filed for all those years. We're going to make up a number because we don't know. We think you owe $50,000.
Yeah. It's called an arbitrary assessment, and it has the force of law. So once CRA issues an assessment against you, even if they arbitrarily make it, you now owe the money.
You're pooched.
Yep.
Yeah, you're totally pooched. And that's where we see a lot of these clients. So let's give those people some advice then. Obviously, filing your taxes is pretty important.
Right.
The obvious answer would be, well, go to the bank and get a loan, man. If you're starting a business, go get a loan, get a $50,000 line of credit. That way you can pay your taxes. It's all good.
Banks aren't in the business of lending money to people that need money. I mean, that's a common enough expression, right?
It's true.
Yep.
And so why is that? Is it as obvious as, well, okay, a $50,000 line of credit with interest rates what they are, maybe they can charge you 5-6%.
Right.
That's a pretty low rate for a pretty high risk because you're a new business.
Right.
Business.
Well, yeah, what are the odds of them getting paid back that $50,000? And it doesn't take very many people to default to put the bank in a position where they're not making any money.
Which is why
Banks don't do that.
They'd be happy to give you a credit card at 20% interest because at least they're mitigating their risk. So, okay, so someone is sitting before you and they've said, yeah, I got no choice. I have to become self-employed. If I want to work on this project, that's just the way it is. I've never done this before. So, and again, you can go back to podcast 242. I kind of spell a bunch of this stuff out. Let's focus on the capital side of things then.
Okay.
So what is number one in the thought process?
Well, so beyond your own savings or sort of investments, I guess the next tier, think of it like a circle or an onion. No, that's not onion's bad.
Onion. A pyramid? How about a pyramid?
We've got a center in the circle is you. So it's your own personal resources. The next ring out is your family and friends, people that know you well, that will trust you, that believe in your ability to do this. After that, then it's, can I get leverage out of assets? So say I've got equity in my house. Am I willing to risk the equity in my house to fund my business? Have I got personal credit that I'm willing to invest in the business? So again, we started with savings money you already have. Then we asked for family and friends to invest. Then we started taking out loans against assets that we already have. This is all relatively inexpensive borrowing so far. Next tier then is personal lines of credit, personal credit. It's starting to get more expensive. Then what people do, unfortunately, is then they max out their credit cards. Now, it's just a bad business model because it's very expensive. And then after that, of course, it's just the second, third tier lenders that are ridiculously expensive. If you're already at that point,
you're
in
kind of
trouble.
toast. So you have to start by figuring out how much is this really going to cost me, and that's a pretty hard thing to do because you figure I'm going to have the first customer on day 1 and I'll get paid on day 30 and it'll all be great. But no, you've got to plan for 6 months or a year.
Well, you got to plan for
2
years of not getting paid. Otherwise, you're making a mistake.
So that's the kind of money we're talking about. So if you mentioned, family and friends. Okay. And in a perfect world, you would start your business after you'd already paid off all your own personal debt and saved up a bunch of money.
Right.
Okay. If that means you're already rich, why are you starting a business then?
Yep.
So in most cases, you're kind of forced into it. So I don't have a whole lot of savings. I may already have some debt.
Right.
If you have an existing job, then perhaps you've already got, a line of credit or something you've qualified for based on your previous income.
Right.
But is that going to be enough? So you own a house. Great.
Right.
You can borrow against that. That's a little risky though, I guess.
Well, particularly if you have a spouse that's worried about where you want to live, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if the business goes south on you, if something goes wrong, now your house is at risk.
And that's why, and I'm sure you've seen this, I can think of a number of people over the last week or two who finance their business with credit cards.
Right.
And everyone is watching going, that's the craziest thing I've heard. Why would you do that? That's nuts. Because you had no choice.
The limit is still, I had one client with 29 credit cards, $245,000. It was all just to finance their business.
Yes, and I can tell you that exact same story over the last month or two.
Right.
And well over a couple of $100,000 on 15 or 20 different credit cards, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 each.
And you're talking 20 to 28% interest on all those cards. So the business is probably successful.
Yeah, this particular case, the business was generating cash flow, but they had no other option but to finance it that way. And of course, they didn't set out to say, well, here's what we'll do. We'll get a whole bunch of credit cards and that's how we'll do it. It was, no, that supplier needs to be paid or we can't get any more supply. Okay, I'll put it on my credit card. Oh, now I'm a little bit behind on the rent. That customer's delayed payment.
Yep.
$1 here, $1 there.
Well, and at some point they probably, I got a new card, so we'll transpose it over because it's an interest rate deal, but they didn't cancel the old card, and so now we max it out again. It's a snowball.
And then you mentioned the kind of outer edge of the circle is the high interest lenders. There are actually high interest business lenders that I've encountered, and they are essentially payday loan lenders except for businesses.
Yeah, well, I mean the factoring firms and all that sort of stuff.
And so they will come in and they'll say, fine, we'll finance your inventory, we'll loan you the money. But here's the deal, the interest rate is really high, and to pay us back, we're going to take a percentage of sales. So, and again, I've seen this very recently that we've loaned you this much money, so every day you are going to give us 10% of sales. Like whatever the cash register shows, you're giving us 10%.
Just off the top.
Just off the top. Well, it's pretty hard to operate a business under those circumstances. So, what about personal guarantees? Have you ever run into that before?
So, folks, for those that don't know this, oftentimes if a business is approved for a loan, the lender will require the owners or some significant party to the contract to sign it personally themselves. So if I had a business, I'd sign it once as president of the company and then once as Ted Michalos, the owner of the company. And the reason they do that is you've now assigned personal responsibility for the business's debts. One of the reasons to set up a corporation is to avoid personal liability. By signing that twice, that advantage is gone.
Yes, and when we set up Ted Michalos and Associates 20-some years ago, that's exactly how it worked. We went to the bank and we said, hey, we're going to be like the leading insolvency firm in Ontario. Like, yeah, sure you are, dudes. So we convinced them to give us an operating line of credit. It wasn't a very big one, but something. And so the corporation was liable for it, Ted Michalos and Associates, Inc.
Yep.
But you and I,
we're also liable for it.
We also had to sign, and I believe our names are still on that document even to this day.
Mm-hmm.
So corporations only go so far unless you've got assets within the corporation that
and even then
they still want someone's name on the hook.
Right.
So if my friend, my relative comes to me and says, hey, I'm starting a business and I need some capital because I watched Doug Hoyes' podcast and I know I need capital. The bank won't lend anything to me directly. Will you give me some money? No, sorry, I won't do it. Okay, well, will you guarantee this loan with the bank then?
Very dangerous. Because if something goes wrong, you're now on the hook. You might as well have lent them the money in the first place.
And that's the key point. You
Right.
might as well have lent them the money. You've
Yep.
put yourself right on the hook for it. So, okay. So concluding comments here then. What is your general advice then to someone who finds themselves as a self-employed person?
So if you are going to be forced into the self-employed role, two things to assume. The first is that you're not going to be able to pay yourself for the first 2 years. So please have enough money or a plan set aside to fund your life for those first 2 years.
And people think you're exaggerating when you say that.
Nope.
And maybe you are. Maybe it'll only take 18 months. But it's very rare that you are making tons of money on day one. Now, maybe if you've got 5 clients lined up and you're going to be a dog walker and there's no capital investment, you can, but that would be rare.
And even if you are making tons of money, then the second thing is you've got to look after the accounting side of things. So you've got to set aside money for things like taxes, HST, all these obligations where people aren't yelling at you. I mean, the common example I give people is you are probably really good at whatever it is that you do. And so the business could succeed. You're probably not very good at accounting. So if you are going to become self-employed and you've got enough money to fund yourself for those first couple of years, get proper advice on how to look after the books and have somebody looking over your shoulder saying, yes, hey, you still got to pay that, you got to pay that, to make sure you're not getting into trouble. It happens so quickly. You can be very successful for 6-7 months the first year. Something goes wrong, a customer doesn't pay you because they got into trouble. And then suddenly your whole world is a mess. So
yeah, life comes at you fast.
it's funny that way.
And we're biased because we're both chartered accountants, CPAs, but I tell everyone the same thing. If you're going to go off on your own, it would be a good idea to at least sit down for an hour with an accountant, pay them a few bucks, and have them show you how to set up a system. Even if they're not going to be doing the books every day for you, you're going to have someone, you're going to do it yourself, whatever. But some basic things that, I didn't know I was supposed to be collecting GST.
Right.
Okay, well, that was a pretty obvious thing you should have asked. What about WSIB? What about EHT? What about all the other initials? Have you
all this fun stuff?
Yeah, you've got to know. So it's much better to figure it out up front and then hopefully avoid the problems. And then with respect to debt, which is what this whole show is about,
right?
Keep it as low as possible, I guess, is the key.
This is going to sound a little crazy for some folks. If you find so let's say you've actually developed a business that's successful, but now the debt is killing you. You've got options as well, though. So that's when you should be talking to somebody like Doug or I, because it may very well be you just need a reset. And the reset could be, well, we kill the old business and we start a new one. There are ways to do that. Just don't give up completely and don't put yourself personally at risk to fund a business.
Yeah, reach out for outside help. Obviously, the purpose of today's podcast was to keep you from getting into trouble. But yes, if you find yourself in trouble, then
there are
reach
always
out for
options.
help.
Right.
Excellent. I think that's a great way to end it.
See you in 9 weeks.
See you in 9 weeks. Thanks for being here. Many of our clients have no choice but to be self-employed. So hopefully what we've talked about today will give some tips to reduce the risk of ending up in a lot of debt. That's our show for today. For Ted Michalos, I'm Doug Hoyes. Thanks for listening. That was Debt Free in 30.